Well, one of the key points that I think it takes to flourish is passion. And my experience has been is that often we start out with great passion and we have either no program or any plan to sustain it. So what generally happens is the passion runs into, what can we say, have to. You know, passion is a want to, it's an excitement, it's a desire to do it, it's a joy. But if you're not careful in ministry, it will become a have to, it will become a burden, a responsibility. And so I think that we have to have passion checks every now and then to check where we are, how we're feeling about what we're doing. And if we need to make a passion adjustment, then maybe some rest, some vacation, maybe some sabbatical, maybe we tweak, you know, what we're doing in some way to get back to that original joy and fire that we have in ministry, because oftentimes the joy is not sustainable, the passion is not sustainable unless you check in with it, monitor it, be aware of it, talk to God about it, talk to the congregation, get some rest. All these things keep passion alive. I think that some kind of a collaboration or mentorship or a group process or program, I think we end up getting isolated and very alone. And so once we're isolated and alone, we don't have the necessary channels of joy, of feedback and support that we really need. And so I would encourage young pastors to connect with other pastors in some form, such as what we're doing, you know, here. Gather together and connect, because the isolation is devastating. It's just devastating. I think that in the call process, if it's a congregational call process, typically there's a search committee. And on the search committee, they put representatives, for example. So there's a representative from the trustee ministry, representative from Sunday school, representative from youth, representative from the women's ministry, and they're all there. And they're all listening to all the candidates to make sure that the candidate, you know, takes their ministry seriously. So what are you going to do for the Sunday school? What are you going to do? 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 And typically the candidate makes all these promises that are very difficult to sustain and keep. So I would advise to a church, establish a priority of what's most important. Because without a priority of what's most important, everything is important. And typically what happens to a younger pastor is, once the younger pastor cannot meet the concern of a particular ministry, such as a Sunday school or a youth, they become dissatisfied. And so rather than the group saying, it's not reasonable that we can expect one person to meet all of these needs and concerns, so what we're going to do is prioritize, meet with the pastor and establish a priority. And maybe we can supplement some of these other areas in other ways. So I find that churches typically don't want to do the hard work of establishing a priority. And when I don't know what the priority is, or everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. And so pastors then are flip-flop back and forth, subject to every criticism. So somebody says, the pastor didn't get to the hospital. You know, I'm upset. The pastor did not teach the Sunday school class. I'm upset, you know, because everybody expects everything. And if a congregation is not clear on its expectations and negotiate it with the pastor and they agree upon those expectations, I think you can sustain a pastor in ministry because there is an agreement that allows a firewall against the criticism that invariably comes. I think spiritual formation is the most critical. I remember when I went to the seminary in 1989, I was a pastor and they invited me to come back and do a preaching class. So my very first seminary preaching class, the very first night, I came home and said to my wife, they are so green, like lambs being led to the slaughter. You know what my wife said? She said, and that's exactly how you were, right? And that's how I was. I had no idea of the opposition. I had no idea of just how people can be resistant to change. And sure, I made a lot of mistakes, but just the resistance to change. So I would encourage spiritual formation, a intense and abiding relationship with God. I'll give you another story. I had a mentor named Edwin Friedman. I mentioned him in the session earlier. And he had a gathering of clergy. You could come to Bethesda, Maryland, and he had 3 days. He's the author of Generation to Generation, Self-Definition, this whole piece. And he would lecture in the morning, and in the afternoon, you could bring up a situation in the church, and then he would discuss it with you, and the group would discuss it. So somebody brought up a situation, and after you get through discussing it, he said, get your Bible and go to the sanctuary. I'm like, I didn't pay money to hear what I already knew. Get your Bible and go to the sanctuary. So after the thing was over, a couple days later, I called him on the phone and said, I want you to explain to me, He said, ultimately it comes down to a relationship with the one who called you. Get your Bible, go to the sanctuary, and talk to the one who called you. Because there's security, there's peace with the one who called you about what the one who calls you to do. So that's spiritual formation, a devotional life, a prayer life, Bible study life, spiritual direction, whatever one needs to maintain a vibrancy in one's spirit, I think is probably what I'd say most to seminarians and new pastors. I'll give you the vision that I have. What if we could design a church where the goal was to release the passion of both the pastor and the people? What is a staff like if people were doing their passion? I think we have institutionalism, traditionalism. We've done it this way. We want you to come and grow the church our way. So if you're doing, if you're gonna grow it and we don't like what you're doing, then we don't want that. I mean, just the kind of. But what if we got excited and just decided to release? What are you passionate about? What do you feel God calling you to do? And we're going to break down some of these institutional barriers and things, and we're going to allow a kind of creativity and flexibility in the ministry and allow people to express their passion. I think that would go many, many, many moons to creating the kind of excitement in the church that people might be attracted to in this time. People are not attracted to the name of the church. They're not attracted to denominationalism, traditionalism. They're attracted to a vibrancy and a passion that they sense in the ministry. And oftentimes, the structures of the church kill passion. So you come up with God, you pray and you get excited about something. You got to meet with 10 committees to actualize what you're excited about. And by the time you meet with those 10 committees, the fire's gone out. There's no more fire. I mean, and I've experienced that. It's just, we have too much institutional bureaucracy that does not allow for genuine creativity that's needed to be relevant in this age to come forth. I think as a young pastor, I didn't have the opportunity to experience this kind of conference. Not that I intended to be isolated, but I ended up isolated. And it took me far too many years to realize the value of peer groups and clergy. The model has changed now. We got more of a peer group model in ministry. We've learned some things. When I was a young pastor, peer group models were not as vibrant or as multiple, so we tended to get isolated. So the thing that I like about the conference is that a seasoned person is able to share into the lives of a young person. I wish I would have gotten some of these insights when I was a young pastor, because I had to try to figure much of this out myself. I had a pastor and I had a mentor, and mentors and pastors have lives and trying to connect at the right time, and I got wonderful mentorship. But a peer group process probably would have allowed for the kind of relationship building, the kind of connections, the kind of support, the kind of, what are you reading, what am I reading, somebody to call in the middle of the night when it's daunting. There are many things that you cannot tell your family. Even if you have a spouse, you learn quickly that you can't share everything, so you hold it and you keep it, and it erodes you on the inside. And so you go to the garden alone, you know, while the dew is still on the roses, and you walk with Jesus and talk, and there's a value for that. But sometimes you find Jesus more present with a hand around your shoulder, or a lunch, or a level of honesty, or that's what I'm looking for, that I can be honest. I had an experience in Memphis with a pastor who happened to be white. When I was going through a very difficult time, he reached out to me, and I reached back. And they built this huge facility, I mean, just massive, massive, massive. And started to have a little bit of difficulty trying to pay for it. So I reached back to him and said, I just want to be friends. I don't care how big your membership is. I don't care how many cars and how many services you got, because all that's transient. It goes and comes. I just want to have a relationship. You know, I just want to, we should be able to talk and not throw statistics at each other, or, you know, bring up our calendars and how many engagements we, all the stuff that clergy can do to one another to establish status. I don't need any status. I just want a relationship. And he agreed with that, and we just built a wonderful, 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 wonderful relationship. And I assured him, regardless of buildings, facility, that he had a friend in Frank Thomas. And he said that I had a friend in him, and indeed I did. And I treasure those kind of relationships. But for many of us, they're late. And I think that we've been able to generate some of those relationships early, and I think they'll be more lasting, and people will stay out of a lot more trouble than I got myself into.